Awesome. Okay. So thanks so much for taking the time, Ryan. Would love to get a little bit of introduction to your background. I know you are the VP of Sales, Marketing, and RevOps at QuotaPath, and you've been there for a while. But would just love to start with a little bit of intro before we dive deeper.
Yeah, of course. I'm Ryan. As I mentioned, I lead the go-to-market teams here at QuotaPath. Been here for about 3 years now. I actually started here in a RevOps capacity, so as a director of RevOps, and have since grown to take over both sales and marketing as well.
Mhm.
QuotaPath helps you use your comp plan to better drive the right outcomes from your sales team and go-to-market teams. So use your comp plan as more of a performance driver than this after-the-fact calculation. And we
Hmm.
also make it easy to calculate and pay commissions. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about comp plans and have probably done, 300 comp plan reviews in the past couple of years. So I'm excited to
Wow. Awesome. Thanks so much for being on. We connected on over Pavilion. I was looking for folks to speak on the topic. I spend a lot of time on the pricing side of things, on the usage-based pricing side of things, and often it comes out that the new pricing models have a lot of other things that have to be figured out that are maybe not really figured out, that have been previously figured out for, let's say, regular user-based software or subscription software. Before going into that, I was just wanting, even for my own learning, what are the essentials of a comp plan to begin with? Let's keep usage-based aside,
Sure.
subscription aside. What is like the most basic comp plan, and what is a seller expecting to get out of a comp plan?
Yeah, so the most basic requirements of a compensation plan, the first is an understanding of on-target earnings for the seller.
Hmm.
So if a seller earns an 100K annual base salary and they have an 100K variable target, they have a 200K
Yeah,
on-target earnings. So
yeah,
their first expectation is, okay, if I do everything perfectly right, like robotically right, how much money should I expect to earn? And then how much revenue do I need to close and over
hmm,
what period to earn that much money?
right.
So do I need to close $1 million over the course of the year to earn my
Hmm.
100K variably? Those are like the major kind of initial components.
Hmm.
From there, the question becomes, what are the ways in which you earn?
Right.
So let's say in a kind of like traditional SaaS model, you earn a percentage of annual recurring revenue up to some sort of quota. You earn your 10% base commission rate. And then as you beat that quota, you earn a higher and higher commission rate, accelerating the revenue or
Yeah,
accelerating your earnings, excuse me. And so
yeah,
that the simple base layer is how
yeah.
much am I earning variably? What's my on target earnings? And how much revenue do I need to close in
Makes
order to
sense.
earn that much money?
Makes sense. So now, even before going into the usage-based land, like most software or subscription software is multi-year, and there is also the purchase may extend. The customer may buy either more quantity or they might buy more functionality. Generally, what has been the best practice there? What do sellers get comped on for that ongoing usage over multiple years? More quantity or more features?
Yeah, so it's really interesting question. There's a number of ways in which teams do this. Some teams say, "Hey, you have a very discrete new business team that's only responsible for the first contract to be signed, and then you
Yeah,
have an account management team that gets credit for the expansion over time."
got it.
Or you have some sort of grace window where the new business seller gets credit for expansion both from price and from feature and user count
Yeah.
over some sort of period of time, like the first 3 to 6 months. In a
Mhm.
usage-based model, this does fall apart, which I'm excited to talk about. But
Yeah.
additionally, a lot of teams will say, "Hey, I have a new business team that's focused on getting that contract signed. Once the contract's signed, they hand it over to an account management team, for example,
Yeah.
that's variably comped on revenue retention and expansion."
One of There is a deliberate reason why I'm actually waiting to get into the usage-based topic, because I feel like there are even other things that were happening before usage-based become more popular.
Mhm.
The other thing was more of a focus on land and expand. So contract sizes, at least in my tenure in the Valley, reduced. The initial contract sizes, maybe not for like really large scale enterprise software, and the focus shifted more to NRR and how to grow really fast. And that was even without usage base coming into the picture. So what is the percept what was the consequence of sellers as a result? Did they face a reduction in their comp, or did companies basically try to make sure that the comp was not that affected?
What a lot of sellers would do is they would bake in expansion over
Mm,
time into the initial contract. That was a lot of the reaction. And so
right.
sellers would say, okay, this is a 30K contract for year one. It bumps to 40K for year two and 50K for year three.
Yeah.
And orgs would then pay them off of the average contract value versus
Right.
the year one contract value was a
Yeah.
lot of where sellers got around it.
Yeah.
The other was depending on the period in which the expansion happens, the orgs would start to pay the seller a lower commission rate for expansion than they would for new business, but they would still get
Right.
some credit and quota relief for that expansion.
Got it. Got it. So, in your sense, has comp for sellers generally stayed overall, maybe let's say in the last decade, close to the same, or has comp also dipped a little bit?
I would say it stayed pretty honestly the same. The last decade included ZERP surge and return
Yeah.
to normal for
Yeah.
sure. But over the course of the last decade, it's definitely remained
Okay.
pretty similar.
Mhm.
Really, what a lot of teams are asking for is more out of these individual reps and having leaner teams be more high performing, which I can talk about.
Okay. So now coming into the usage based pricing, right? And I'll give you a little bit of context as to my experiences with this at Twilio. I was launching usage based pricing, which it seemed like our executives were pretty much on board, our product side, strategy side executives, and the discussion of sales comp was completely ignored in that pricing change, in all of the strategy materials and everything. And the moment I took it, even before I do a sales training, I generally get some of my top sellers, ask them for feedback, and they said, there is no way that we're going to be offering this up. And one, this is make creating cheaper deals. Number two, customers actually have not been asking for it, which was true. There was some other internal reasons why we were doing this. And number three, if I don't have clarity over how I will get paid, or even if you're saying I will get paid later, there is an issue. And so we will not even touch it with a 10-foot pole, is the quote I remember. So what at what point in this transition should one start thinking about sales comp? And then maybe in your experience, maybe you can share some real experiences that you've had of what you did, maybe a given situation, and what tends to work in these situations.
So, first question, when do you think about it? Immediately. The second you start to think about usage based pricing, you have to think about how you're going to reward your sellers for it.
Yeah.
If you don't, you run the risk of alienating a lot of your top performers and having some unwanted attrition, which you certainly don't want. So, how you're going to compensate with any sort of pricing and packaging change has to be top of mind paired with how you're going to actually price the product.
Yeah.
In terms of
Yeah.
how we've seen companies do this really well, so there's a couple different ways that they've done it. One is having some concept of minimum expected revenue over the course of a first year. Because if you take the mechanics aside, basically what you're trying to understand is from a usage-based customer, how much annual recurring revenue are you expecting them to give you in their
Yeah.
first year? Typically,
Yeah.
you compensate a seller off of ARR in the first year.
Yeah.
And so when you roll out usage-based pricing, you want to understand your projected annual recurring revenue from this customer in the first year, even as they scale up towards it, and then have some levers in how you're selling the product that dictate what that is likely to be. So is it size of team, size of data storage, number of users? Is it number of put through calls? Like, what are all the different things that you ask in the sales cycle that allow you to estimate the annual recurring revenue of this customer in the first year? And
Right.
then there's a couple different ways in which you can compensate for that. One, that's probably the most seller forward, is the seller estimates the annual recurring revenue of this customer in the first year. And you pay them commission off of that, and you monitor over the course of the year. If they don't get to that point, the projected ARR, you then claw back the diff in commissions versus what they estimated and what actually happens. And if you go above that amount, you actually pay them more commissions as that comes through.
Right.
So that's probably like the most seller forward way. The most business forward way is to actually just pay the seller monthly their commissions on a deal over the first year as invoices are received. Every time an invoice comes through for the Jones deal for March, you pay them in April, the component of as it adds up to their expected kind of variable comp. So,
Right.
hey, I think this is going to be an 120K deal. Okay. ARR, month one, they pay us 5K. Cool. Seller, you get 5K of your 120K in
Right.
variable comp. And as each month things come through, the seller
Yeah.
gets credit. That's probably the
Yeah.
most business forward way because it's
Yeah.
cash in, cash out, but like it protects the business, right?
Right.
Something that I tend to see be in the middle is if you have a really good estimate of, or a good estimation system of what you think the annual recurring revenue is going to be, you could take half of that and give the seller quota credit and payout for half of that. If it's a 120K deal, they're at least going to pay us 60K in the first year. Pay the seller for that 60K in ARR. And then at month 6, how have they progressed towards that 60K? If they're still below it, you're not going to pay them any more money. If they've gone above it, you're actually going to pay them on the diff. And then by the end of the year, you have a true up. So you have 2 true up moments between month 6 and month 12. So it's basically a question of how seller versus business forward do you want to be? Do you want to wait till the cash is received and pay each time the cash is received? Do you want to trust the seller and pay them in advance? Or do you want to do something more in the middle? Those have been ways I think teams have gone around it.
Got it. What tends to, is there, you think is there a best practice forming around one of these 3 methods in the industry generally?
Yeah, so a lot of teams, when they think about pricing and packaging for usage-based pricing, they will have some sort of like minimum required amount for a certain package you're on.
Yeah.
So that like middle ground that we talked about, which is like either pay the seller on half or pay the seller the commissions upfront on the minimum and then track the expansion over time. That's been the most popular that I've seen, which allows the seller to get the big paycheck when they close the deal, while also making sure that you're not fronting a lot of cash to a seller that you're not going to receive.
Makes sense. One thing, given that you're also you started with RevOps and you're still responsible for that, what systems changes have you seen being necessary? Because this seems like there's a lot of tracking that's going to be needed for making this work really well.
Yes, easy answer is a tool like QuotaPath helps a lot with this. But in terms of back end, what you're trying to do is you're trying to join your CRM with your ERP, right? Your invoicing tool. And so what you're going to want to have happen is as the deal is moved to closed won in CRM, you have a way to, as the invoices populate, have a field in the CRM that's like total revenue received. This is a 120K deal. Every time an invoice comes through, push that into CRM to update the value that is the total revenue received. Hey, it's a 120K deal. We've received 12K, now 24K, now 48K. And use that secondary revenue received as the field you're using to determine kind of eligibility to be paid. So our product can join those 2 systems together for you, can join your CRM and your ERP ourselves, but we also see a lot of customers want to own that data and they'll push it into their CRM and then just sync from their CRM into a tool like QuotaPath to pay this. So really what you want to understand systematically or logically is, one, how can you predict expected ARR, right? And what mechanics do you have to understand the projected year 1 ARR of this deal? Like what firmographic data can you operate off of? And then 2, how do you track actual cash received? Because that cash received is going to be very key to your ability to pay commissions.
So it seems like a couple other things will happen as a result. One is you have to be somewhat accurate in this estimate, but the estimate is going to have a lot of variance. And then this is going to have some backup effect in terms of how the organization now manages cash. So I'm curious, like, what tends to happen? How much variability have you seen some of these models have? And then what tends to happen on the cash, like cash flow management side? Because you don't really know, you have to invest in the business and you have to make sure you pay the sellers. Are there any, like, what gets me thinking is, would there be any ever occasions where business runs out of money and hey, I don't have money to pay you for the comp because maybe these are stupid questions, but
no, the nice part is if you're becoming much more cash centric in cash out and paying commissions. So the truth is it actually de-risks the business a lot cash wise, right? Because the rep is only earning their commissions once the cash is received. In truth, in a lot of usage-based comp plans, reps hounding buyers down to make sure that they pay their bills in a way they probably didn't if they just signed a contract for 120 grand in ARR and then walked away and went to close the next deal. If you're in a usage-based model as a rep, you got to watch that customer all the way through. The other thing that's really interesting is from an org design perspective in usage-based orgs, you're seeing a lot of account executives turn into more account managers. And they build like a bit of a residual book. And so if let's say you end up you only pay on cash received model in entirety, what a lot of AEs are arguing is, okay, that's fine, but then I want to be the person who implements them and gets them set up for success and drives expansion. Like I want to be new business plus account management, because if I sign Jones software for $5,000, but I know they could become a 500 grand customer, you bet I'm going to follow them along, drive their implementation, train their team, drive adoption, all to grow that to a 500K account.
So that's a very positive outcome, basically, at the end of the day.
I would say it's a shifted outcome. The negatives are that it becomes harder to have a pure new biz team and like an account management team, which is really nice from a specialization perspective. It's pretty hard in a full usage-based model to have just sellers, because then you have to figure out, okay, you have to figure out a way to compensate them after the fact for something that they did maybe 6 to 9 months ago. Getting that right is actually more challenging. So I think it's just a different shape. You also have to navigate, which a lot of companies are trying to get away from, is this like residuals concept. Because you don't want a seller bringing in an account, they grow dramatically, and then 2 to 3 years later, it's still in the seller's name, and they're still getting these like residual checks from the customer too. So you have to have your cutoff points be very clear as well.
What generally have you seen as cutoff points in this case?
The first year makes a lot of sense, right? Because historically sellers are comped on annual recurring revenue. So how much do they bring in the first year? But you have to have a really smooth handoff point then. You have to figure out the rules of engagement of your business. Is it that the seller owns the account through the first year and then hands it off to an AM? That the seller closes the deal and hands it off to an AM immediately, but they check in to make sure the account's going well. Like you have to have a really smooth system of operations if you're going to roll out usage-based pricing.
Got it. And in terms of this variability of expected revenue from an account, in terms of, let's say, a percentage basis, what is expected, right? If there's a founder or there's a company going about doing it, should they expect 5% variability, 10%? What is something that you've seen before that you've seen can be managed?
In terms of variability between like actual and outcome?
Exactly.
That's the reason I give that 50% number, is because or like really 25% number is because you're paying the rep for only 50% upfront of the expected value. So you're basically like cutting you're giving more buffer than you actually expect. So on average, like 20-25% is okay, because and you'll minimize clawbacks in that regard. So, but it really, the truth is, it depends on how predictable the usage is of your product. If you're selling a financial services like cash collection software that a function of revenue, and you can see revenue growth, like you have a good way to model your cash in. Whereas if you are selling data storage, it can be a little bit harder to understand how much data do these different businesses actually have. And so that's where you want to do a lot of upfront scoping in the sales process to understand the drivers of that variability, lock those in. And if you don't know them initially, like for the founders in the room, I would be focused on, hey, you have tiers for set levels of usage. It's usage-based pricing light, where it's up to 500,000 monthly active rows, you're paying $2,000, and up to from 500,000 to $1 million, you're paying $4,000. And you have these like package buckets that are like more predictable in terms of recurring revenue for you.
Makes sense. So in the last 4 years, one of the things I've observed is that initially, like 2021, around usage-based pricing, consumption pricing was very popular. My take on that is that interest rates were very low and growth, like everything was high growth mode, and that this pricing model helped with that. But then interest rates increased and free cash flow became more important. So I'm just curious, what have you noticed on the ground in terms of sentiment within sales on this? Have they gotten around to it? Are companies taking a pause? What is the general sentiment both among sellers and businesses in general? How have you seen that ebb and flow?
So I think senior leaders all want to do it because they see great stories like the Snowflakes of the world, and they want to be able to tie cost to outcome.
Yeah.
I think that sellers don't love it because
Mhm.
it's easier to sell, hey, this is a 12 grand contract, pay me for
Yeah.
20 right now.
Yeah.
And they often can't see the vision, or they're not close enough to understand like necessarily the vision of that growth
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
potential earnings for them. And it like complicates their cash flow as a seller. It's
Mhm.
just, it is a more complicated statement for them.
Yeah.
So senior leaders love it. I think there's a lot of talk on LinkedIn about it in terms of
Yeah.
actual practical application. I think
Yeah.
there's less than is talked about.
Yeah.
I think there's probably that's for two reasons. One is ARR and like revenue modeling is much harder in a
Yeah.
usage-based model.
For sure.
And so going to raise capital on ARR multiples and that sort of stuff is very hard in a usage-based model, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And two, you can have really interesting surges or splits in your net and gross revenue retention in a usage-based model, because one customer could be spending $5 grand this month and then 30 grand next month and then drop down to 15 grand the month after. And so the variability makes it really hard to like model the success of the business so far. So I think people want to do it. They see the success in doing it. They see the excitement in doing it.
Yeah.
But in practice, there are fewer industries actually implementing something like this.
Makes sense. Even my own experience with this was that internally the business had conviction, but a lot of our customers, at least in that segment, were not used to buying usage based. So sales had resistance, but customers also had resistance because they were like, hey, I don't know how to do this math. And you're asking, because the company was trying to innovate in pricing, but customers were still coming from an industry where that was less common. Do you
Yeah,
have any
as
thoughts?
a
Yeah.
buyer,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm mixed on it too.
Yeah.
We have a couple contracts that are usage based where you see
Mhm.
unexpected spikes in cost, and finance comes to me and is, hey, why are we spending an extra 10 grand on this tool that I didn't think we were going to?
Yeah.
So like the revenue predictability and the cost predictability and transparency is really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's going to become much, much more popular in a lot of these AI workflows.
I was going to ask you about that next. Yeah.
Because I might be the only person using it. And
Yeah.
so in order for that business to be successful, they can't do user-based pricing. And they also have a margin problem. So like these AI tools, like auto updating CRM with AI or auto doing this with AI, they're going to need to get much more into a usage-based pricing model, likely because they could have customers using the product much more than others. And it's not like standard SaaS where your margin's pretty protected. If somebody uses your product more and more, your margin goes down more and more. And that's where I think a lot of pressure is going to be.
Yeah. Makes sense. Those were most of my questions, Ryan. Is there anything else traditionally you ask at the end? Is there anything I should be asking that want to communicate on this topic to folks that might be listening?
Yeah. So I think for usage-based comp plans, and that specifically, I think you got to do a couple things. The first is set clear expectations with your sellers about how they're going to variably earn in this new model. And tie that to rules of engagement of account handoffs. If I'm earning commissions based on every month the cash that comes through from this usage-based model, then I, as the seller, need to have access to that customer over the first year to make sure that they're successful and happy and growing.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it off of like my projected ARR, you have to have a really good system for me to project it and then understand the 6-month and 12-month like clawback or expansion opportunities for cash. So you have to walk the seller very clearly through how they're going to earn with real-time examples.
Yeah.
And if you're making a shift from a traditional SaaS model to more of a usage-based model, you have to ramp them along the way. You can't just say, hey, you all of a sudden in Jan we're switching to usage-based, so now your earnings drop by 80%. You're earning a 1/12 of what you used to before. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? You either have to phase some of their old accounts into their book and build
For sure.
for them,
Yeah.
or you give them a spot
For
bonus
sure.
to help with the transition. You
For
can't
sure.
just phase them out like that.
For sure. I remember when I come into this is a few years ago now at Twilio, the projected revenue change from the usage based model was a 50% drop in revenue. And I was like, I was told to implement. I'm like, how does this make any sense to you? You're okay with, and this is in executive reports that's
Yeah,
written. This does not make any sense to me. How is this like? It was done completely from an engineering standpoint. So we had to introduce the minimum commits or a platform fee
sure.
so that we don't lose revenue, and especially considering the older accounts is a completely different thing altogether. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I appreciate your feedback, because usage based pricing can be helpful and is probably going to be the more standard thing going forward. But that doesn't mean that it's purely pay as you go. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that it's just it can be $5 for the amount of power and gas that you use, or it could be 500. This is not does not directly translate to PG&E yet.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
that's the main concern I have, because so many other things have to change, and even customers expect some sort of predictability, and they're not really equipped to buy this as PG&E either.
No, and I think you have to survey your customers. Like,
Yeah.
how do you understand the value of the product that you've bought?
Yeah.
And if that product is, take QuotaPath, for example, if the value is giving more people visibility into their commissions and motivating more people, then
Yeah.
a seat-based pricing model continues to work really well for us because every
Yeah.
incremental person you add,
Yeah.
you've presented more value,
For
right?
sure. Yeah.
But if a customer comes back to us and says, actually, I value it based on how much in commissions that we've paid,
Yeah.
I'm willing to pay QuotaPath a percentage of those commissions that we paid,
Yeah.
then you shift it, but you want to meet them somewhere in the middle where you
Yeah.
could potentially reduce your per seat price and add on some sort of usage-based model to it. So
For sure.
I think you just have to understand what your customers actually want and
Start there. Yeah.
don't force the hot LinkedIn topic on them, is what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Those are most of my questions, Ryan. This will be recorded. This is live on YouTube, LinkedIn, so folks can see the recording. I will also be putting it on YouTube later. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so
Ajay,
much.
thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Cheers. Bye.